Lecturer at the Universities of Edinburgh and the University of the Highlands and Islands. She's published quite a number of important books in the field of Scots language, including Modern Scots Grammar, Working Words, and she co-authored Scots Speak and a number of other important publications as well. I know that the Scottish Language Dictionaries are going from strength to strength, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about them this afternoon. I'll hand over to Chris.
Dictionary of the Scots Language and related works. Now, I am assuming that most of you are familiar with the Scots language, but I have, over the years, learned that this is something I really shouldn't take for granted. So, just for the next couple of minutes, the language we're talking about here is the Germanic language. It's one of the Indo-European families of languages, and Scots is based on the West Germanic, particularly Anglo-Frisian. Anglo-Saxons and Jutes, remember when they sort of Romans go home and they sailed up the Thames and took over. Now, on to that. What we're working with in Scots is this substratum of Anglo-Saxon. The next exciting thing that happens history-wise is the Vikings. So into this mix we get a whole host of Old Norse words. Many of these died out from mainstream English, many of them survived, but even more survived in Scots and in the northeast of England. Later Norse borrowings or Norse borrowings through a different route from the Norwegian Vikings into Orkney, Shetland, Caithness, down the west coast, and very often you'll find words in Orkney and Shetland that you also find in Wigton and nowhere else. And these are the Norwegian Vikings that have gone round the top and down the other side. So we've got this vast number of Old Norse words in Scots. The next exciting thing that happens, along comes the Norman Conquest. Now, we were never conquested, but the effect of the Normans pushing refugees into Scotland, the settling in Scotland, or the granting in Scotland of baronial lands to the Norman French. These Norman French people bringing their retainers from the north of England, so a huge influence from French into Scots. Some of it dated from that period, and others coming from somewhat later because we had the Allied Alliance. We stayed friendly with France when England didn't, so we've got additional French words that English never formed. Of course, the influence of the church and learning. So we've got quite a number of Latinate words that are still around and surviving. And I wonder if ducks and Proximate Kesset will stay with us, since things have got less competitive in schools, or are they getting more competitive? And things like pandy for a stroke of the belt. Again, another that known, but oh dear, language changes. Then of course we had quite a lot of Dutch influence. It's amazing how many of the Dutch words have got to do with commerce, coins, loads and loads of Dutch words for coins, and trade, one or two other odds and ends from Dutch. Also quite a few to do with boats and fishing, very much what you would expect. And let's not forget Gaelic. Some of them early loans, many of those are geographical, and many of them later cultural loans. Thank you very much, Sir Walter Scott. So this is the language we're talking about. It's a rich literary language. I don't know what your individual interests are, whether you're looking at some of these fantastic older poets that are very much under-taught in schools. They're all well quoted in the dictionaries. Now, I don't know if you can quite manage to read that, but this is following on from our rich heritage of poetry. This Sunday, we're doing a performance of the Flytington Bar in Kennedy in the Argyll lodgings beside Stirling Castle. We've done this a couple of times in Mary King's Close in Edinburgh. We've got a couple of superb actors, and this time we're going to have a little bit of youthful rap as well. I hope, I haven't seen that bit yet, but I certainly can recommend the Flyting. If you've got time for an away date to Stirling, you'll find it on the website. Along with this flowering of literature, we've got Briefly, publishing house that publishes in Scots, and then things start to go slightly pear-shaped with the Reformation, where every house that could afford it had a copy of the Bible in English. Probably the Geneva Bible was the most accessible one. And if you're learning to read and write from that religious, sacred work, then that's really going to influence the way you spell, and probably some of your grammar as well. Union of the Crown 1603, the Union of Parliament 1707, and the power base shifts to the south. The court poets are no longer Edinburgh and Stirling, which are permanent court poets, they are now English court. So it would appear that Scots is no longer a courtly language. I recently was sent a manuscript from William Drummond of Hawthorne Den, who has largely been castigated for being such an Anglo-Saxon poet. His manuscript is absolutely full of Scots. Maybe we should blame the publisher a bit more and the poet a bit less. Or perhaps he was just writing to please his audience, but it was very clear from these manuscripts that his own first language was Scots. But, as we know, Scots has declined in prestige, although in recent years a lot has been done to resurrect it. We do have some very good modern Scots poets today. It's in exciting times with it getting back into schools. But it certainly took a bit of a dip. And in case you're wondering, this language I'm talking about is the language of the yeses and the nos alike. This is far too important to leave to politicians. We'll carry on speaking Scots, whatever happens. In 1808, John Jimison produced his etymological dictionary of the Scottish language, and it was an absolute tour de force. He had thought, when he took up his ministry in a wee place outside Dundee, that the way the folk spoke there was just off a course, not nice at all. Until it was pointed out to him by the professor of antiquities at the University of Copenhagen that this was really rather an interesting language. So he started looking at it a bit more closely, got hooked, as lexicographers do, and produced this absolutely fabulous 2-volume dictionary, which has been a boon for lexicographers ever since. But things keep moving, and in the around about 1916, there was a meeting of dialectologists and decided we should do something about preserving this language. And then by 1919, Sir William Craigie decided he was going to do the older bit. He reckoned that Scots stopped around about 1707. So he said, right, I'm going to make a dictionary starting from the earliest traces of Scots up to around 1700. That's a dictionary of the older Scottish tongue. He worked on it throughout the 1920s. We got the first fascicle that was published in little bits. The first one came out about 1933. At the same time, Sir William Grant started the Scottish National Dictionary. And he was a bit more to go about it all. It's nae deed yet. We'll start at 1700 and take it up to the present day. Well, his enthusiasm was obviously highly infectious because he set up the Scottish National Dictionary Association. I'm sorry I can't get the whole thing on, but it wouldn't fit on my scanner. He set up this SNDA, and our first president was Lord Merson of Agra and Daughter. Of our honorary vice presidents, that you will see is headed by the Sultana of Johor. Scots has always had a fairly wide interest. The fact that she was a Scot married to the Sultan, come on, it looks good. And the rest of it just reads like a who's who of who was around in the 1920s. Ramsay MacDonald, Stanley Baldwin, Duchess of Athol, Marquess of Londonderry, Earl of Elgin and Kincardine. John Buchan's in there down the page a bit. Charles Murray, the poet, he's down there. I don't feel insulted. There's not a huge representation from St Andrews University. This was probably a wee case of who knew who at the time. But you can all rectify that today. You will find outside the leaflet, if there's not enough leaflets to go around, take a handful of postcards or a bookmark, you'll find our address and you can become supporters, members of Scottish Language Dictionaries and become one of the illustrious. So the Scottish National Dictionary, it started up by the same time, first fascicle out in 1933. These guys, they subscribed, some of them more, some of them less, and the idea was that they'd get a fascicle every time it was completed, and eventually they'd have a complete dictionary of Scots. Okay, so it wasn't finished until 1976. It would have been even worse with the Dictionary of the Older Scottish Tongue. It was finished in 2002. So this was a tremendous leap of faith by these people. Absolute visionaries. Now, in 1976, the modern dictionary was completed. And what happens? I suppose they all went to the pub and thought, well, that's the job done now. No. Because the language continues to change. And I've got one or two little examples of language change. Pillion is one that I particularly like. Now, the quotation in the Oxford English Dictionary very slightly predates the one that we've got in the Scots Dictionary, and it attributes it to Irish Gaelic. Now, which do you think is the most likely route? It's also in Scottish Gaelic. Would it have gone from Scottish Gaelic onto a motorcycle, crossed the border down to England, or would it have come across the shop from Ireland? It's up for debate. It could have been either. In fact, it originally referred to a pad on the back of a horse, a cloth saddle, that sort of thing. And so you can imagine this delightful grandmother in her bune heels with her silk-coated petticoat, riding on a pony on one of these paths. Not as depicted here in the back of a motorcycle, but the meaning of the word has changed as times have moved on. It's still happening. We're still adding words to the dictionary. We put on a new supplement on the electronic dictionary in 2005, and we're still adding them. Now, gadgie. We all know gadgie? No? This is a loan word from the travelling people. There's quite a lot of them come in from the travellers. And I first heard it in Dingwall. It's been around in Edinburgh for a long time, in West Lothian for a long time. Places where travelling people overwinter. The children go to school, the local children sit next to them and pick up all the words from the travellers simply because their mothers don't want them to. So they get into the community that way. Cruiseltelly. You know Cruiseltelly? Yeah? Well, it's getting more and more widespread. Now, for some people, this is an interesting one because some people think it means one thing, and some people think it means the complete opposite. When I first encountered it, for those of you that speak English all the time, you'll see that some council estates are absolutely covered in satellite dishes. So in those places, some people refer to Cruiseltelly as the ones with the satellite dish. We've also got Cruisel juice. Cheers. I heard an interesting one from a lawyer friend who'd been going to a football match in Dundee, and she didn't want to park her car in a particular street because there was too many Cruisel curtains. Boarded up windows. We haven't got enough evidence to get that one into the dictionary yet. And another brand new one is Cruisel spray. Now, it's a bit sort of cityist to refer to the Glasgow tan all the time. So, if you have a Glasgow tan and you come from somewhere else, it's the Cruisel spray. So, people have been hugely creative with vocabulary. Spraff is one that just seems to have sprung up, particularly amongst young people. This is what I'm doing. I'm standing here spraffing at you. There's I think it's either it's North Berwick High School. Their school magazine is called The Spraff. So it's catching on. We have it occurring in writing. It's in the dictionary. Other words that might not have been familiar to Craigie, and certainly not to Grant, except perhaps perhaps in the later years it might have been creeping in. Steaming. You know where that came from? Tried it a few times but never researched the etymology of it. Remember the old days, some of you will, when you couldn't get a drink on a Sunday unless you were a bona fide traveller. Well, one way of being a really bona fide traveller, nobody's going to argue if you're sailing up and down the Clyde on a steamboat and you get off it steaming. That's where it came from. Shan is another one. We find it in a dictionary of the older Scottish tongue in the context of shan money, counterfeit. And then it just disappears, goes off the radar, stops being a part of the language for a few centuries. Now that's sneaking back into Edinburgh and West Lothian. Again, travellers. It seems to have been picked up particularly by teenage girls. Now, shan just means bad. He's a Shangaji. Watch him. That was a Ballygaji. He's fine. Or I'm feeling Shan today. Well, I'll go back to your bed and take 2 aspirin. But these teenagers are using it in the sense of, oh please miss, that's Shan. That's no fair. So they've slightly repossessed the meaning of it. Homologate, we found earlier, is a Latin loan. And just this week, we gave that as a sort of a retiring word. We gift people words. Or you can actually sponsor a word. See our website for details. But we gave a retiring board member her homologate as his word. And he was surprised and delighted, because the last time he came across this word, it was in a skiing document, and it's actually, he sent the document, and it's actually there in several different languages, with the word homologate standing out in the middle of the French. So we've got it as a Latin loan, and through this particular document, it's getting given back to Europe as a loan word from Scots. So we are an international language, that's exciting. And pilgrim, I've already mentioned. Now, how do we collect words? That is surprisingly difficult. In the old days, we had some existing collections of words to work with. From 1597, we had De Verbore Significatione, which was a glossary of difficult legal terms, Scots legal terms, glossed in Scots, and sometimes also in Latin. So that was one source. From the early 18th century, we've got Ruddiman's edition of Gavin Douglas's 1513 Aeneid, and Ruddiman gave a fairly full glossary for that. So that's another big body of stuff to get started with. Burns glossed some of his own stuff. We've got Jimmison's dictionary. We had armies of readers working with texts and making out paper slips with the word, the quotation, the source of the quotation. They were put in little pigeonholes all over the office, hundreds of thousands, even millions of them, and then collated by the editors into a paper dictionary. What they did was totally amazing. Then they sent out word lists to all areas of Scotland, saying, do you know this? Do you know these words? And that was a very good way of checking the regions to see how widespread words were, whether they were still surviving. But there's one obvious drawback to it. You can't ask about a word unless you know what the word is you're asking about in the first place. You can't find the things you don't know. That's difficult. Now, sometimes people were very good about writing back, scribbling all over these questionnaires that were sent out, saying, I don't know this word, but my word for it would be. So we got some extra information that way. To start with, dictionaries were very huffy about using verbal sources, oral sources. It had to be written down. We are not so huffy about that anymore, because as you know, so much of Scots doesn't get written down. It's such a lively spoken language, but in recent years its literature has been comparatively neglected, and there's types of discourse where Scots seldom makes itself felt. It's interesting to see now that it's getting into things like emails, websites, even texts. But for a long time we didn't have that, so getting oral information is also useful. We've got a very active outreach officer who goes around schools, community groups, and she does a lot of word collecting. And one method that she uses, we've pinched from the University of Leeds. Clive Upton there and Carmen Lamas, one of his PhD students, I think she's now teaching at Aberdeen, they developed this way of discovering people's words. So you give them, we put loads of sheets like this, built around topics, and you give them to a family group or close friends, and you ask them to discuss the words and fill in this questionnaire. What's more interesting, in fact, than what they actually fill in is what comes out of the discussion. Because in the process of discussing what you call this or what you call that, they come up with other things or other items of clothing or furniture or behaviour around the topic, and we ask them to record these words as well when they come up. So we're building up new words from sources like this. I took something like this into a school in North Ayrshire, and one of the words was cold. I'm feeling cold. And every child in that class wrote down chankin. A very local word, but very much alive. So that's one way of collecting words. People do send them in. We're always delighted to get emails. On our website we've got a form for reporting words, and we like to get things like how old the person is, education, the quotation, where they come from, as much information as possible. But just to get the word, once we know that word's out there, we can start to research it. Obviously, we use the internet. But again, we can't do an internet search until we know the word to key in to search for. So they got compiled eventually into a dictionary of the Old Scottish Tongue and Scottish National Dictionary. And shortly after that was complete, they decided they were going to condense the 10 volumes of Scottish National Dictionary and the 12 volumes of the Dictionary of the Old Scottish Tongue. Let's condense it into a single volume, and that's what they did, the Concise Scots Dictionary. This came out in 1985. You may have one that looks a different colour. That's because it's been through 3 different publishers. The current version is Edinburgh University Press. Now, 1985, if you've been listening to what I've said, you'll think, just a minute, the Dictionary of the Old Scottish Tongue hadn't been finished, not until 2002. So, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your current edition of the Concise Scots Dictionary does not contain all the information from the end volumes of Dost. There's quite a lot there from it, because slips were available, but it's not totally complete. The new edition, which we hope to have on the shelves for Christmas 2015, will make good that deficit. It will also have lots of Orkney and Shetland words that were missed out of the first one because of space constrictions. Every word will have at least some kind of etymology, even if it is unknown. We'll try to give a little something for each word. The modern words will have their pronunciation as well, or at least a few representative examples of pronunciation, because we can't possibly give every accent from every hole in the hedge. If you go down to the borders, every half mile, people will tell you they don't speak the same way as us. So we've got it as a concise dictionary, we have to limit it. The companion volume to the Concise Dictionary, for those of you who are writers in Scots, you can't live without a thesaurus. Now, it's not as big, not as full as we would like it to be. Susan Rennie at Glasgow University is in the process of doing a pilot project to produce a historical thesaurus along the same lines as the historical thesaurus based on the Oxford English Dictionary. That's still in its early stages yet. If the pilot works, she can spend the rest of her life and half of the next on the big project in the complete one, and that will be a huge piece of scholarship. So these are the two things that your bookshelf really cannot do without. On the lighter side, I mean physically, not so hard to carry around, the Essential Scots Dictionary. It used to be the Scots Schools Dictionary. A little bit of Scots, English, English Scots, easy for children to look up, and it works both ways. Similarly, the Pocket Dictionary, which has got even less in it. The Essential Schools Dictionary, we're working at the moment on making an app. Oh, we're just so 21st century. With the exciting things that are happening in schools, the new Scots Language Awards, the 1+2 language in primary schools, they're encouraging Scots to be one of the +2s. So we can, and the Scottish Studies Award, we want to encourage children to look up the dictionary, and the online dictionary, the big online dictionary, is probably a bit too informative to put in your mobile phone. And the Concise Dictionary is quite hard for younger children to look up. So the app should be just exactly what they're looking for. We should have that out fairly soon. We've got a WizKid interface person from Glasgow University working on that just now. A few years ago, I had both my hips replaced, and I was, they confined me to barracks. So I thought, well, let's use up the time, and I did 3 little books based entirely around the quotations in the dictionary. Desert Island Discs. When you're asked what book you would like apart from Shakespeare and the Bible, the number of people that say the Oxford English Dictionary. And it's because all the books are there. Well, our online dictionary does exactly the same thing. One of our more experienced editors says you can find the whole of Douglas's poetry in there, but not necessarily in the right order. But the quotations are just marvellous, not just the literary ones, but some of the things that people say, some of the things out of newspapers. It's just the whole of human life is there. And I thought, oh, let's get these quotations out into people's consciousness. So I produced 3 of these little books, and Maggie Scott, who is a place names expert, produced the Scottish place names one. They're a bit old now, but you might just still find them on Amazon. Hopefully going cheap. They're only a £5 each at the best of times. Before I go on to the resources, we have one more book. I couldn't get it onto the PowerPoint because the cover image wouldn't transfer for me. Modern Scots Grammar. Now, it's a very thin book. This is because it is intended for schools. And it's in Scots. The best thing about it, probably, is the fabulous illustrations by Bob Dewar. And it's intended to be as much an introduction to grammar teaching. It just happens to be through the medium of Scots. So it's a first step in learning grammar. Are we sad? that people don't learn formal grammar anymore? Yes, we are. And this is a step towards rectifying it, because I think, how awful is it that most people's introduction to grammar is when they do French or German. A lot of people aren't doing German anymore because it's too difficult, it's got too much grammar in it. So they do French, they do Spanish. And that's when they learn what a pronoun is. The words like nominative and accusative, far too hard. So this is an introduction to learning grammar in at least one of your own languages, if you are a school pupil. It's not the definitive grammar of Scots, that still has to be written. And I know that there are plans afoot in the academic world to try and get money to do that. So that's us, and that's some of the publications that we have produced. But the big thing, the really exciting thing, is this. Now, last Friday, this was formally launched in Glasgow with much speechifying and rounds of applause. This is the new online dictionary. Those of you that have been using the old one, doesn't it look pretty? The old one was a bit dated in appearance. Now this one, it should be a lot easier to find things. And I think I did bring along some worksheets. I'll pop them out. Oh no, I left them on my desk. No, I didn't. I've got some worksheets just to help you find your way through them. To find your way through this. If we put in fen, new feature, we didn't have this in the old one. You're starting to get all the words beginning with fen. Now, yoch. We know and love the letter yoch, but how do you find it on a keyboard? You don't have to. There you go, and it adds it into your list. And if we just click on any word, it takes you straight into the entry. And something that we didn't have in the old one, what does RATS R stand for? That's the RATS raven. There we go, straight through to the bibliography. We like that. Right, the word taffeta. How do you spell taffeta in older Scots? Well, you've got a choice of nearly 100 different ways. And none of them come up as taffeta in the old dictionary. So, if we do Taffeta, I think that's how you spell it in modern, is it? Right, there's all the various spellings. Now, you can see what the problem was. You can work out what that means from beginnings and ends and dashes and brackets, but a machine can't. So the old version would not find any of these abbreviated forms. What our IT guy has done is he's expanded them all, and then he's checked it against the data by doing a search to see if these words are there, so that he's sure he hasn't created any spurious forms. And even if he has, it wouldn't matter all that much, because you simply, they just wouldn't come up, or it would send you to the main head word where you've got the existing text. So, being able to find all these different spellings of taffeta, big step forward. No more. Sometimes you look up DSL and you know that word is there, but you don't know where the bracket is, so you can't find it. Okay, let's go back to the start. And that was a bit of a tiny toss. Let's go to the advanced search. Now, one thing that we haven't got on this as yet is we haven't got a Boolean search. That will come. They're working on it. It's obviously not going to be absolutely perfect right away. There will always be improvements to be made. But we just felt we reached a stage that it was so good we had to share it with people. So the Boolean search is not there. You can find, using this advanced search, you can find most of what you want. Something I use the DSL for quite a lot, instead of the thesaurus or alongside the thesaurus, is I use it as a reverse dictionary, as English Scots. The old one, I could do that simply by searching senses, and you'd get all the words where the definition is the English word you're looking for, so you can work it backwards, although you get quite a lot of rubbish in with that as well. But a bit of common sense and plodding, you can find it. You can do much the same thing in this one by searching quotations, or the full text of entries, get rid of the head words. There's ways around it, but again, that's something that I would like to see put on it as a proper census search. But okay, we put in Kate. You get many choices. If we get rid of, let's try and leave that search. Head words only. That's probably the one that would be most useful for doing on your mobile phones. It takes you through to the full one, but we start off with something a lot cleaner. The other thing that you can do with it is if you are working with a manuscript and that ink blot or the dastardly worm or just a bit of bad handwriting has obliterated a bit in the middle, you can put in a question mark for one letter, or if there's more than one letter that you can't read, put in an asterisk and it will come up with suggestions various. Sometimes it will not succeed, but let's think of I don't know whether we spell it with a C or a K. It knows you spell it with a C. So you've got that wild card option as well. Okay, let's get rid of this fella and go back to the PowerPoint. Just very quickly, they've been talking about www.dsl.act.uk, which is scattered all over the bookmarks, many of which are outside. Our other websites, the School Lab, which is the website for children and teachers. Scots Dictionaries is our home site. If you're interested in what is going on in Scots Language generally, our sister organisation, the Scots Language Centre, has got a very active, busy website. with lots of examples of spoken and written Scots, for what's going on in education at the moment, and it is very exciting. See educationscotland.gov.uk. I couldn't come to this university and not mention the wonderful resource developed here, the Records of the Parliaments of Scotland, which I use quite a lot to find Scots words. The National Library, Tober and Joke, is also known as a Trust of Riches from the School of Celtic and Scottish Studies at Edinburgh. The Shetland Dialect Dictionary has got a feature that I would like to have in some of our future dictionaries. They've got sound files. We'll have that, or we're working towards having that in the app. We've got some words you can do in the app, but we'd like to build on that. The Scots Corpus from Glasgow University and the Association for Scottish Literary Studies, the Storytelling Centre, and scotsdictionaries.com, which is not our dictionary,